The old Johnson trolley line trail. This is where I used to pierce the deep woods woven shade, as the poet William Butler Yeats once wrote, with my dog Spot, which Yeats would never write. Spot was a champion treer of squirrels. She'd always bolt from my side as soon as she saw one, and I'd keep walking towards the quarry, and I could hear her barking in the distance, but always moving in the direction I was walking. She didn't like to bog down on one squirrel. And then by the time I got down to the creek, I'd call out her name, and she knew the drill. She'd come running back, and to the quarry we'd go. It's always autumn in my memory of those times, just like it is right now. The crisp air, the scuffling through the leaves, the trees, their palette of brilliant colors. The trail was so exquisitely pretty back then, much more than it is now. Wider, more groomed, none of this blowdown blocking the way every few feet. And the woods were so much more open, more welcoming, not choked with all this lacerating underbrush. Spot could never make it through that. All the sensibilities that went into the making of this video were nurtured 50 years ago along this trail. I was having Walden-like thoughts even before I read Walden. And it's funny, every time I feel really nostalgic, I'm tempted to go down to the township and ask them if I could take my chainsaw back here and cut away all this debris and restore the trail to its former glory, the way I remember it back in 1976. But then I think to myself, what's the use? When Fitzgerald wrote at the end of The Great Gatsby, we beat on, boats against the current, etc., etc. He was talking about oars, not chainsaws. And so, on that note, I'm going to head down to the banks of the Shippatawkin and describe how I rediscovered the remnant of the old broken down bridge. So this is the Shippatawkin, or as us kids used to say back in the 1970s, the creek. I am a good 100 yards from where the original country lane took you straight to the broken down bridge, this being the only way to circumvent all that underbrush, the mark of untamed nature that has grown rank over the last 40 years. And I brought these along with me, just like I did a month ago during my first expedition. I'd assumed that the easiest way to find the bridge, or what's left of it, would be to climb down into the creek and to wend my way back by walking through its shallow waters. Boy, was I wrong. The Shippatawkin is pretty twisting as creeks go. Lots of blind bends with little surprises when you round them, and one big one. Take a look. Imagine my shock when I first saw that. Completely arresting my progress, stopped dead in my tracks. Just the magnitude of it as blowdowns go, incredible. Even a little disturbing. What has happened to my lovely little creek, I asked myself, the burbling brook of my youth? None of this existed back then, so pristinely did it meander, as creeks by their nature should. Then it dawned on me. The woods we frolicked in back then were 30 to 40 years old. No wonder they were so unspoiled. Now they're pushing the century mark, and this is what happens when woods get old. This is the forest primeval. That is the opening line to Longfellow's epic poem, Evangeline. The murmuring pines and hemlocks, bearded with moss, stand like druids of eld, with voices sad and prophetic. Well, Longfellow, I'd hate to say it, but some of your druids have keeled over. So on my first expedition, because the creek was blocked, I got out and threaded my way through some dense underbrush along a deer path before returning to the creek, not knowing that I'd just overshot the broken down bridge by only a few yards. I kept on going, wondering if every trace of it had disappeared, washed away by 40 years of floods. Sensing I had gone too far, I turned around and started back, keeping my eyes peeled for any sign of its existence, like black moldering masonry festooned with vines. I rounded a bend and saw something that made me start. the way you do when you see a ghost. In this case, the ghost of my childhood. This is what I saw. So this is it, the remnant of the broken down bridge. Pretty modest as ruins go, but how it awakes memories. Most of the bridge was still intact in the 1970s. There were 3 steel beams that span the 2 abutments. These are the indents of where they lay. And the beams were covered with wooden boards so decrepit there were holes big enough to fall through. Hence the name, the Broken Down Bridge. Jump ahead to 1984. I'm 20 years old and I'm keeping a journal. Spot is near the end of her life. It was a warm day in November, and on a whim I decided to walk with Spot back to our old nature haunts. Her reaction, yapping ecstatically, an index of just how infrequently we came back here, the novelty having long since worn off, at least for me, not for Spot, never for Spot. Here's a photograph of her. She's earned her cameo, the good girl. I wrote of our walk in my journal. Down the hedgerow we went, which I described, backyards on one side, field on the other, crossing the trolley line trail where, looking toward Lawrenceville, I could see the start of a new road being built, which became the end of Bergen Street. Then we came to the bridge, finally stripped bare of all its slats. So I walked across one of the steel beams while Spot took the creek. Without breaking stride, we climbed this gentle slope behind me and emerged into a wide sweep of open field that would become Kingsbrook in the late 1980s. Here is how I described that field. The path on the other side of the bridge was much thinner and less walked upon. It was also lined with small trees and bushes which often had grown profusely into the path. However, about 50 yards up the trail, the woods ended and we were back to fields on either side. Most of the fields in the area were used for growing corn and soybeans, but these fields seemed to no longer participate in remunerative growth, but rather had grass planted on them. The grass was not very thick at all, but actually was so sparse that the rows in which the grass seeds were planted were still easily detectable. Although up close one noticed this deficiency, from a distance these verdant fields were quite attractive as an object of Pacific beauty. Pretty turgid as prose goes. I think my journal writing back then was more an exercise in thumbing through a thesaurus than keen observation. Even so, just in terms of observation, that desire to record, whether in a journal or on YouTube, there's not a whole lot of difference between me back then and me right now, except the lapse of 41 years. As the saying goes, it's all water under the bridge. So this is the final stop on the old Johnson Trolley Line Trail, at least in the direction of Princeton, before the trail becomes so choked with underbrush it's impassable, cut off from the quarry without doing some serious bushwhacking. Not even during the 1970s did any part of a bridge span these 2 abutments. Although there was a center pier, it is now underwater, having toppled over who knows how many years ago. It did not make the papers. I've only picked this backdrop to further showcase Lawrenceville's uncharted byways and boast just a little of my acquaintance with them. But I really want to confine my final thoughts not to the trolley line, but to the country lane, and enhance its memory with one last story, which runs like this. Before they built Wood Lane Estates, I and my siblings used a certain expression to inform our parents that we would be back here in this wilderness of 2 fields, the creek, the quarry, and the trolley trail. It was all simply called the fields. We're going back to the fields, we say, and then head out the door, dogs in tow, pursued by the most insouciant request to be home for supper. That was before 1974. Then, when they built Wood Lane Estates and we got chummy with all the kids back there, we still referred to the development as the fields. Going back there, we didn't tell our parents whose house we were going to, just saying the fields sufficed. That blanket expression no mere development could render obsolete. So in its honor, I am going to invoke one of my musical heroes, Mark Lanigan, my exact contemporary, born in 1964, just like me, and sadly passed away in 2022. This is his song, Field Song, and I trust you will recognize the footage to which it is set as a bird's eye view of the lost country lane of Lawrenceville.
Let's walk down to the water. There's hyacinth in bloom. I spend my days loving you. I left these fields because I never knew. To be a horse, to be a train, I wouldn't have the heart. And next to the tracks, you find an apple cart. Maybe we'll stay at home and be together, no more to move along. Together, no more to move along. See the water, it's mixed with light. For you, I've been shaken regarding the fields, humbly mistaken.